chapter 3. And we're probably only going to get to the rebellion of Genesis 3. The question of evil and the three rebellions. So there's actually a theological word for the problem of evil in the world. This is probably the biggest reason when I run into people who are either agnostic or atheist. Why would God allow all this suffering in the world? And so theology has a term for that, and it's called theodicy. It's the problem of evil in the world. So, if you ask a modern Christian today, why do we have all this evil in the world? Well, they're going to point to the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. Said we now live because of their sin, because of their rebellion, and we inherited their sin nature. Now we live in a fallen, broken world, and bad things are going to happen. That's the reason for evil in the world. And there's natural evil like tornadoes and cancer, and then there's gratuitous evil like violence that people do to each other and war. All of these things. But if you asked an ancient person the same question, why is all this evil in the world? They would point to that story of Adam and Eve, but they would also point to the two other rebellions. The Genesis 6 rebellion of the sons of God with the daughters of men, from whom came the Nephilim giants. That was a problem. In fact, at that point, God sends a flood to wipe out all that had breath on the earth because of the proliferation of violence as a result of what happens in the beginning of Genesis chapter 6. And then a third rebellion, the Tower of Babel rebellion. And let me also say this, because this gives us some context. You can look at almost every ancient culture, and there's a story of how the gods came down and took them wives and had children that had special and unique abilities. Or perhaps they were giants. Now, Pharaoh of Egypt was considered a son of God, but Osiris is one of these. If you go to Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh was one of these. In fact, Gilgamesh was one of 7 called the Apkallu. The Apkallu were part man and part God, little g. And what's interesting, in the last few decades, we've really seen this play out in Hollywood, especially if you like the Marvel movies. And I mentioned this before, but the movie The Eternals, it's like Enoch, first book of Enoch. They literally just made a script of it. It's very interesting. But we have all of these mythologies. Think about the Greeks. Who is Hercules? Part man, part God, right? Who is Achilles? Part man, part God. You have all of this mythology. Well, I believe they borrowed that all from the Hebrews. They borrowed that all from the Hebrew story. And so an ancient person would describe Genesis 6 as one of the reasons we have so much violence in the earth. Now, the Babylonians thought it was a great thing that the gods, little g, these fallen angels, came to earth and mixed with humans. They thought that was great. Not in the Hebrew Bible. It's a source of great evil and violence and chaos. So the unseen battle today is a result of 3 rebellions that involve both the earthly and spiritual realms of God's household. So the first rebellion that we'll look at, the spiritual warfare in the Garden of Eden. The first encounter with spiritual warfare is in Eden, the sacred mountain garden home of God and the place where Yahweh communed with humanity. Now, we've talked about how Eden was on a mountain. If you read Ezekiel chapter 28, you'll see where Eden was on a mountain. It was a sacred space. What is a sacred space? A sacred space is a temple. It's where the natural meets the supernatural. That's what a temple is. And so Eden is a sacred space. It was a walled garden, and we discussed this last week, but the term paradisos comes from an old Persian term, paradisa, which is the walled garden of the palace of the king. So that's Eden. That's what we're talking about. Number 2, Eden was sacred space where humans commune with God and perhaps other spirit beings. Now, I think that's accurate, and here's why. Look at number 3. There is no sense of alarm from Eve when the serpent spoke to her. If you're out in the woods and a snake starts talking to you, what are you going to do? You're going to take off, right? I'm not sticking around. But there's no sense of that with Eve. It almost seems like she knows the serpent and has talked to the serpent before. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.'" Now here's the sad thing about that, and it's part of the lie. In whose image were we made? God's. Guess what? We were already like God in the sense that He made us in His image. But no, the serpent comes along and says, God's keeping something back from you. He's holding back something. The serpent caused Eve to question God's goodness. Verse 6, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was standing right there and didn't say a word." Well, that's not what the text says. It just says he was with her. "And he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened. Something changed in their consciousness. And they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." I've often wondered about this point. What's the big deal about that? I think it means that they knew how to hurt each other. You know, we judge people based on their physical appearance. Often mistakenly, often wrongly judge people on the basis of their appearance. Psychologically, one of the nightmares that's common to people is appearing in front of a crowd naked, in front of a crowd of your peers. Naked, why? Because you are vulnerable. Why are you vulnerable? Because you know people are judging you. And so what Adam and Eve did, they usurped the knowledge of good and evil without the wisdom of God. That's why you and I, we think we know what's right later down the road, only to figure out it was wrong because we think we know better. Don't you? I know better. And you know better than anyone else, don't you? Problem is we don't. The problem is we're really ignorant. I'm ignorant because I don't know what's good for me. I don't even know what's good for me, much less what's good for you. And you could say the same thing, right? It's hard to know what's good for you, much less trying to judge what's good for another person. And so this is the quagmire that we're in, constantly judging each other for everything without the wisdom of God. Now, fortunately for us, Christ has become the wisdom of God through the Holy Spirit for us, so we can have discernment, right? And so James tells us, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And we make a mistake when we don't do those things. Okay. So I think Eve probably knew the serpent. C, the word nachash, this is the Hebrew word for serpent. It's a very, very interesting word, though. So I want to talk about the different meanings of the word nachash and its root, because there's an interplay in the words, and I think you'll see it here. We have some layered meanings. So, nachash, a serpent or a snake. Genesis 3:1 that we just read. Then Numbers 21, the fiery serpents and the bronze serpents. That's nachash, nekoshet. Nekoshet is based off of the same root word as nachash. And it means to be shiny, to be bright. And then in Exodus 4 and 7, when Moses' staff becomes a serpent. So as a noun, it means serpent or snake. But check this out. As a verb, it means to divine, practice divination, omens, enchanting, magic.
That's a verb. That's very broad.
Magic kind of sums it up, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Enchanting, declare omens, practice divination. You know, the old one is reading the tea leaves in the bottom of the cup. So the same word, but used in context. This is used in Genesis 44 for Joseph's cup used for divination. Nakesh. The practice of divination is condemned in the Bible. Leviticus 19, Deuteronomy 18, 2 Kings 17. We are not supposed to be soliciting the help of the other side with the fallen angels. So, it means serpent as a noun. It means magic or enchanting as a verb. And as an adjective, it means shining. Linked to polished metal's luster and descriptions of divine or angelic beings. Burnished bronze in appearance. We see this word used this way in 1 Chronicles chapter 4. The city of copper, or the shining city, is the Ir Nachash. Ir being the Hebrew word for city, the shining city. So some scholars, like Michael Heiser, render Ha-Nachash in Genesis 3:1 as the shining one. So how does it change things if we take that meaning? Now the shining one was more crafty than any other beast of the field. Or how about the enchanter? That sort of brings a different meaning. But we still, in our in our English sayings, we have a glimpse of this and why the Hebrew writers, particularly Moses in this case, chose serpent. Because it embodies all of those things. The word nachash, meaning serpent in Hebrew, that's if it's used as a noun. If it's used as a verb, it means enchanting, to do magic, to speak magic words. Or as an adjective, it means the shining one. So, in English, we say that guy, if I say that guy is a snake in the grass, what do I mean? That guy's a snake in the grass. Not to be trusted. Yeah. So we still have this idea, that guy's a snake in the grass. It's not a good, that you don't want to be called that, right? It means you're untrustworthy. So that's the various meanings of nachash. So it strongly connects with description of Lucifer and Satan in Ezekiel 28. He is the anointed guardian cherub, full of wisdom and adorned with precious stones. So he is shining. The Hebrew in Isaiah 14, the Hebrew is Hallel ben Shekar, the shining star, the son of the morning. It's sort of a reference to Venus, which is one of the brightest stars in the sky. I know it's a planet, but it's a wandering star. It's one of the brightest in the morning. And so he's called the morning star. And then the New Testament tells us that Satan himself can transform into an angel of light. And so all of these words are wrapped up in that one Hebrew word, nachash, the serpent. So these passages reinforce the idea of a once glorious, shining spiritual being who rebelled. All right, E, the nature of the conflict. Deception and distortion of truth. So the key issue in Genesis 3 is not primarily the physical appearance of the nachash or how he looked or appeared or manifested. Although that's interesting. And I'll just say a word on that of how I think he appeared. Whenever an angel appears in the Bible, what do they appear as? 100% of the time. No. Say it again. A man. They appear as a man. As a human being. They take this form. And you have a glorious form of an angel, but you also have a mundane form of an angel. So in Hebrews, we read, you might have entertained angels unaware. In other words, they can look just like us. And so, I believe that Satan appeared to Eve as an extremely handsome and charming individual. An extremely handsome and charming man. Now I know it says serpent, and he is a snake. Because we have layers of meaning here. But his judgment to crawl on his belly and eat dust, that's what a snake already does. So the judgment doesn't make sense if it's just a snake. Does that make sense? It's something else is going on. But Dr. Mudmale says it really doesn't matter how he manifested, but what he says. So spiritual warfare operates through deception. The serpent distorts God's true word and introduces doubt and reframes reality. Now, you should pay attention to this because this is exactly what the serpent will do in your life. He's going to twist truth. He's going to try to present a different version of reality. He's going to twist God's words. He's going to try to make you doubt God's goodness. Dr. Joel goes on to say this is the essence of the unseen battle, a conflict between truth and falsehood. The most dangerous lies are half-truths that sound trustworthy, leading humans to compromise and act contrary to God's will. The Nachash exploited possible familiarity as a throne guardian. In other words, he was there in Eden, on the mountain of God. We read that in Ezekiel. He was there. We don't know what his purpose was. But he's called the anointed cherub. And cherubim were throne guardians. So somehow he was supposed to be a guardian there in Eden. But he exploited the familiarity with Eve and with Adam. I think they both had talked to him before. I think they both trusted him. And that resulted in our fall. Let's see. We're almost done with this, but we're not quite gonna. Can you do a few more minutes? Just a few more minutes before church. So, consequences. Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden. Adam would have toil and trouble in working the soil, pain, and ultimately geriatric problems and illness, because he's going to age now in a way that his body breaks down. Eve's going to have the same problems as Adam as a result of the fall, with the addition of pain and childbirth. And then both are going to return to dust. Now let me actually pull up the text, because this bit is quite interesting. Okay. So the first judgment is to the serpent. It says you're cursed. On your belly you shall go, dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman he said, I'll multiply your pain in childbearing. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. To Adam he said, cursed is the ground, thorns and thistles it shall bring forth. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So in the old Western movies we hear ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Here's the interesting thing. I often wondered what this phrase meant, dust you shall eat. That's the serpent's judgment, right? Dust you shall eat. What is it? 4 verses later, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The serpent becomes Lord of the dead. He's the soul eater. So you have this beautiful being. Lucifer was one of the most beautiful beings in heaven. And he is cast down from his position in heaven. And he is made to be the soul eater and to dwell among corpses in the underworld. That's a terrible judgment. But that's the connection with the dust. And we don't have time to go through it, but you can read in Psalms, especially Psalm 22, the dust refers to death, to people that have died. And that's the serpent's judgment. He becomes Lord of the dead, the soul eater, which we see reflected in Egyptian mythology in the Egyptian god Apophis, who is the god of the underworld, the serpent god of the underworld. Well, looks like we'll have to pick up here next week. We don't have a lot to go in the notes on chapter 3, but it's going to be so good. And Brother Ronnie, that aha moment will come next week, I suppose, when we talk about Abraham's seed, and when we talk about the seed of the woman, the seed of Eve, and the seed of the serpent. We'll discuss that next week.